Mother sent a text at 11:42 on a Tuesday night. I remember the time because I had just set my phone down after a 12-hour shift debugging a pricing algorithm, and the notification lit up the dark ceiling of my apartment like a flare. The dinner Saturday is invitation only, corporate partners and board members. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to come, you understand. No punctuation on the last sentence. She always did that when she'd already decided the conversation was over. I read it 3 times, set the phone face down, picked it up and read it again. Saturday was the launch dinner for my father's restaurant group's new flagship location, a 200-seat fine dining concept in downtown Nashville that had been 4 years in the making. I had grown up watching him sketch the floor plans on legal pads at the kitchen table. I knew the name of every investor, the sourcing region for every protein on the menu, the exact shade of walnut they'd chosen for the bar top. I had spent the last 18 months building the software that ran the whole back end. But I wouldn't be appropriate for the launch dinner. I turned the ringer off and lay in the dark. At 11:58, my phone lit up again. My brother. Addie, what did you do? Mom and Dad just saw something. Call me right now. What the hell did you do? That something was the press release that had gone live 11 minutes earlier. My company, Clear Plate, had just signed a partnership agreement with a regional restaurant consortium spanning 14 states. The deal valuation was attached to the announcement. It was larger than anything my father's group had ever closed. But before I tell you what happened that night, I want you to understand how we got there. Because none of it makes sense without the beginning. My family runs Ellery Hospitality Group. My father started it with one diner in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, 31 years ago. He expanded slowly, methodically, a second location, then a third, then a full-service concept, then catering contracts with regional hotels. By the time I was in middle school, Ellery had 8 locations and a reputation in the Southeast that my mother protected like it was load-bearing infrastructure. My brother was the heir apparent. 4 years older than me, he had our father's instincts and our mother's polish. He could read a dining room from the door. He knew when a server was burning out before the manager did. He had a gift for the floor, for the people, for the story of a meal. My parents had him shadowing the GM at the flagship by the time he was 22. I liked the back end, the numbers, the systems that made the whole thing run. When I was 17, I noticed that the purchasing team was over-ordering proteins by an average of 18% per week, based on a forecast model that hadn't been updated since 2009. I put together a spreadsheet that cross-referenced historical sales data with seasonal foot traffic and suggested reorder quantities. I showed it to my father on a Sunday afternoon. He looked at it for about 45 seconds, said "That's interesting, sweetheart," and left to take a call. My mother asked me to help set the table for dinner. I went to Vanderbilt on a partial merit scholarship, declared computer science, and spent 4 years building tools that optimize things. Supply chains, pricing models, reservation flow. I came home to help during summers. I ran the numbers when the group was considering a new lease. I built a simple demand forecasting tool and offered it to my father's operations director, who thanked me and said they were happy with their current system. When I graduated, my mother said she was proud of me, and then immediately asked when I was planning to move back to Nashville. I got a job in Atlanta with a logistics firm. I learned how machine learning applied to perishable inventory management. I spent 3 years getting very good at a very specific problem, predicting demand for things that expire. Restaurants, it turned out, had the exact same problem, and almost no one had solved it well. I started building Clear Plate at night, on weekends, in the hour before my alarm went off, a platform that could take a restaurant's historical sales data, cross-reference it with weather, local events, day-of-week patterns, even social media sentiment, and produce a demand forecast accurate enough to reduce food waste by 30 to 40%. I tested it with my own models first. Then I reached out to 2 independent restaurant owners in Atlanta who agreed to pilot it. The results were immediate. One owner cut her weekly food costs by 22% in the first month. The other eliminated a recurring shortage problem that had been plaguing his kitchen for 2 years. They told their friends. Their friends called me. I didn't tell my family yet. I had learned to wait until I had something they couldn't dismiss. My mother called on a Thursday evening in late March. I was reviewing a pilot report when her name came up on my screen. "Addie, we need to talk about the group." She didn't ask how Atlanta was. She didn't ask what I was working on. She laid it out the way she always did, efficiently, like a briefing. My father's group was preparing for the biggest expansion in its history, the Nashville flagship, a new concept. Investor pressure to demonstrate operational sophistication. My brother was leading the charge, but he needed to show the board they were ahead of the curve on technology. They'd been reading about AI in restaurants. They wanted to show something real. "You know this space," she said. "You could help your brother present it properly." I heard what she meant. They didn't want me to build anything. They wanted enough to look credible in a room full of investors who were asking questions they couldn't answer. I told myself it was just the conversation. I said I'd come up for a weekend and walk him through the basics. My brother met me at the Ellery offices on a Saturday morning. He had coffee ready, which surprised me. He hugged me at the door, which surprised me more. We sat in the conference room overlooking the parking structure, and he opened his laptop. "Walk me through how it works," he said. "The forecasting, the waste reduction, the actual mechanism." I kept it high level. I talked about input variables, model architecture in general terms, the types of outputs operators could act on. I showed him sample dashboards, nothing proprietary, just concept visuals I'd built for a pitch deck I was drafting for investors. He took notes on his phone, fast, more than the conversation warranted. 3 weeks later, he called and asked me to come to a meeting with a restaurant technology investment group that was considering putting capital into Ellery's expansion. Just to sit in the back, answer questions if they came up. I went. The room was full of people who evaluated restaurant businesses for a living. My brother stood at the front and clicked through a slide deck that showed Ellery's operational vision. "We are piloting a proprietary demand forecasting system," he said, "that integrates historical sales data with real-time market signals to reduce food cost variance." The slide showed my framework, my terminology, my sample outputs, cleaned up and rebranded with the Ellery logo. One of the investors asked who had developed it. My brother smiled. "Our family has deep technical expertise. My sister has been instrumental in the development." Instrumental. After the meeting, he walked me to the elevator and handed me a folder. "Standard NDA," he said, "covers anything related to Ellery operations. Protects both of us." I read the first 2 pages in the elevator. Non-disclosure on all proprietary information related to Ellery Hospitality Group. I asked him whether it covered my independent work. "Of course," he said. "We're family. It works both ways." I signed it. I believed him. For the next 4 months, I gave him outputs, reports, summaries, forecasts I'd run through ClearPlate's model on Ellery's anonymized sales data. Never the source code. Never the training architecture. Never anything that was the actual heart of what I'd built. But he kept asking for more detail on the model logic, more specificity on the weighting system, more information about how I'd handled the edge cases. I started keeping records. Tim stamped everything, screenshots of requests, notes after calls. I had built ClearPlate long before my first conversation with my brother, and I had the version history and commit logs to prove it, but I wanted a paper trail of every ask and every answer. Then the asks became demands. He called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in my apartment eating lunch when my phone rang. "Addie, we need the full system, the platform, the code, everything." "No, hello. We have the board presentation in 6 weeks. The investors want to see a working demo. We need to integrate it into our operations before the flagship opens. You signed the NDA. This is Ellery work." I set my foot down. "This is not Ellery work. ClearPlate existed before I ever talked to you about it." "You consulted for us," he said. "You used our data. That creates a conflict of interest. Our attorneys say we have a claim." I felt the air change in the room. "What attorneys?" "Just hand it over, Addie. Mom and Dad are aligned on this. It's the family business." "This is what families do." I told him no. I hung up. My mother called 10 minutes later. Adeline. She only used my full name when she'd already decided I was wrong. "Your brother is right. You signed a legal agreement. We need you to do the right thing here." I explained again that the NDA covered Ellery proprietary information and that ClearPlate was not Ellery's. I had built it independently prior to any consultation with my own capital and my own time. She interrupted me. "Don't make this into a legal dispute. We are a family. Give your brother what he needs, and we'll work out something fair. Your name on the product, a title. Something." I said no. My brother showed up at my apartment the following Saturday. I didn't buzz him up. He waited in the lobby until my neighbor let him in on the way out. He knocked and I opened the door because I wanted to hear what he would say directly. He sat on my couch like he lived there. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, which he always did when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. You're putting your side project above the family. Do you understand what's at stake? Dad has everything in this expansion. The house is collateral on the construction loan. If the board pulls back because we can't deliver on the tech promises, we lose the flagship before it opens. You want that on you? I was standing by the kitchen counter. My phone was in my pocket recording. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. The house, I said, you told investors you had proprietary technology and you need my system to back it up. We need the code, the models, the full pipeline. You signed a document that covers this work. I didn't, I said, and you know I didn't. He leaned back. Our attorneys will make a different argument. Conflict of interest. Breach of consulting duties. It's a much better story for a judge than the one you're telling. And you know how these things go when one side has resources and one side doesn't. He stood up, fixed his jacket. Think about it this week. Don't make us go down a road we don't want to go down. He left. The door didn't slam. That was somehow worse. The calm of it, the confidence that he had already won. I sat on the floor next to the couch and listened to the recording. His voice was measured, precise. The thread about the house, the attorneys, the resources. I had 23 minutes of it. I called my IP attorney the next morning. What followed over the next 3 months was quiet and deliberate. I gathered everything. The original GitHub repository with timestamps dating back 3 years before my first conversation with my brother. The commit history showing every version of ClearPlate from the first prototype. Emails where he asked for more specificity than a consultant would have any reason to provide. The recording. I had a former professor from Vanderbilt, someone who had reviewed my early ClearPlate architecture in an academic context 2 years before any of this, provide a written statement verifying the system's independent origin. Her statement was 3 paragraphs and airtight. I had a former colleague who had attended one of my brother's investor presentations and kept a copy of the slide deck he'd used. She thought something was off and had saved it without knowing why. When I reached out and explained, she sent it without hesitation. I filed an amended patent application. I retained an attorney who specialized in trade secret disputes. I wrote down every timeline detail I could remember and had it notarized. And then, I kept building ClearPlate. The consortium partnership had been developing for 6 months. A group of regional restaurant operators across the South and Midwest who had been looking for exactly what I had built. Their technology director had found me through one of my Atlanta pilot clients. We had been in talks since January. By September, the terms were finalized. The press release was scheduled for a Saturday night. The same Saturday as the Ellery flagship launch dinner. I had not planned the timing intentionally, but I didn't change it either. I spent that Saturday in my apartment. I ordered Thai food and ate it on the couch. I watched the clock. At 7 p.m. I opened Instagram and saw my mother's stories. The restaurant lit up, candles on every table, my father in a dark suit shaking hands with men I recognized from his investor meetings. My brother at the bar with a glass of wine, laughing at something off camera. Servers in the new Ellery uniforms my mother had spent 6 weeks selecting. No one had texted me the address. At 11:37 p.m., the press release went live. ClearPlate, an AI-powered demand forecasting platform for food service operators, has entered a strategic partnership with Meridian Restaurant Group, a 14-state consortium representing over 340 locations. The platform, developed by founder Adeline delivers demand forecasts that reduce food cost variance by an average of 31%. Industry news picked it up within minutes. A trade publication ran a piece by midnight. A tech reporter who covered restaurant innovation had been briefed under embargo and published simultaneously. My phone screen lit up and did not stop. My brother called first. I let it ring. Then my mother. Then a number I didn't recognize. Then my father, which surprised me because he almost never called me directly. When I finally answered my brother, his voice was not the measured tone from my apartment. It was raw. What did you do? What did you just do? Do you have any idea? The investors are calling. The board chair just texted, Dad. People are asking whether Ellery's technology claims were real. You just blew up everything. I stayed silent. We had attorneys ready to file Monday, he said. You knew that. You did this on purpose. I had a deal close, I said. I announced it. You announced it tonight. You picked tonight. My attorney advised on the timing, I said, which was true. She had pointed out gently that simultaneous visibility would make certain arguments harder to sustain. Good night. I hung up. My mother called at 12:30 a.m. I answered because I was curious what register she would use. ICE? Adeline, you have embarrassed this family in front of every person we have spent 30 years building relationships with. Your father is devastated. Whatever grievance you think you have, this is not how you handle it. You need to issue a correction. You need to clarify that this technology was developed in partnership with Ellery. It wasn't, I said. That's not what our attorneys will argue. I know, I said. I have the recordings. Silence. What recordings? Good night, Mom. The fallout unfolded over the following 2 weeks in the trade press and in conference rooms I was not in. The investors who had committed to the expansion placed their contributions in escrow pending clarification of the technology claims. 2 of them withdrew entirely. The construction loan was not in jeopardy. The house collateral turned out to be a detail my brother had added for effect, which I had suspected, but the board requested an independent review of Ellery's technology representations. The review found that the materials presented to investors had substantially reproduced the architecture, terminology, and visual frameworks of Clearplate without authorization or attribution. My brother stepped back from his operational role pending the outcome of the review, his title changed to advisor, and an announcement that used the word transition 4 times in 3 sentences. My father called me on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the launch dinner. I had not spoken to either of my parents since the night of the announcement. Addie, he said. He sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard before. Not the tired of a long service, the tired of a man who has been sitting with something heavy. I need to tell you something. I waited. I saw what your brother was doing. Not all of it, not until the review. But I saw enough, earlier than I should have. I told myself it would work out. That you'd come around, that the family was more important than the details. He paused. I let your mother tell you not to come to the dinner. I didn't stop it. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that you'd be fine. That you always figured things out on your own. I didn't say anything. I was wrong, he said. I'm sorry. The words were real. I knew him well enough to know that. But real isn't the same as enough, and I had stopped needing his apology to know that I was right. I appreciate you saying that, I told him. I'm not ready to talk more than this right now. I understand, he said. I believed him. That was the last full conversation I've had with any of them. I didn't block anyone in anger. I did it on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of coffee and a clear head. My brother first, then my mother, then my father. Removed from the family group chat, though I had muted it months ago. Unfollowed the Ellery accounts. Archived the emails. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like finishing a sentence I'd been writing for 10 years. Clearplate's Meridian partnership launched fully 8 months after the announcement. By the end of the first year, we had reduced food cost variance by an average of 28% across the consortium, slightly below my projected 31% but within margin, and improving each quarter as the model trained on more data. I moved from Atlanta to Nashville, not for family but because the talent pool was right and I had a team to build. We took a floor in a building on Demon Brine Street. 7 people, then 14, then 22. A real office with a real kitchen where we ordered lunch most Fridays and ate at a communal table. I hired a CFO who had spent a decade in restaurant finance and understood the specific way food service businesses thought about cost. I hired an engineering lead who had built forecasting systems for a grocery chain and knew where my blind spots were. I started saying we and meaning it. The Regional Conference for Independent Restaurant Operators invited me to keynote in the spring. 260 attendees in a hotel ballroom in Memphis. I had never spoken in front of a group that size. I wrote the talk in one sitting at 2 a.m. and revised it 6 times. Backstage, the event coordinator handed me a mic pack and asked if I needed water. I said yes. She came back with a bottle and a smile and said, "You're going to be great," and I don't know why that almost made me cry, but it did. I walked out when they announced me. The room was brighter than I expected. I could see the first 3 rows clearly: operators, owners, people who had been running kitchens for decades. I told them the honest version. I told them that I had built something real and had nearly lost it to the people who were supposed to be in my corner. I told them that documentation was not paranoia, it was professionalism, that a time-stamped commit history was worth more than a handshake from anyone, including family, that the word proprietary means nothing without a paper trail. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when people are actually listening. I was told, I said, that I didn't fit the image, that I made things complicated, that the right thing to do was to hand over what I'd built and let someone else put their name on it. I looked out at the rows of faces. I want you to know that the complicated person in the room is often the one building the thing that actually works. They stood up, not everyone, but enough. The messages came in for weeks. A woman who had a software tool her business partner was trying to claim as shared IP, a man whose family restaurant had pressured him to hand over a recipe database he'd spent years building, people who recognized the specific texture being dismissed by the people closest to you and then expected to hand over the work anyway. I read everyone. I responded to most. Ellery Hospitality Group restructured. The flagship opened 8 months late, scaled back from the original concept, fewer seats, a simpler menu, no proprietary technology to demonstrate. My brother left the company entirely. Last I heard, he was doing consulting work for a hospitality group in Charlotte. My mother no longer posts about Ellery on her personal accounts. My father is still involved, in a quieter way. And the group is still operating. They're not gone, they just became something I used to know. I don't check on them. I built a life that doesn't require me to. What I know now, that I wish I had known earlier: file before you share. Not because people are always malicious, though some are, but because clarity protects everyone, and the absence of documentation only benefits whoever has more resources when things go wrong. Write the email, save the message, get the agreement reviewed by someone whose only job is to protect your interests, not your family's comfort. Your work is yours. That is true even when the people sitting across the table share your last name, especially then. I think about the night my brother sat on my couch and told me the house was on the line, how calm his voice was, how certain he seemed that the weight of that sentence would be enough to make me hand over everything I had spent 3 years building alone. It wasn't cruelty for its own sake. That's what took me the longest to understand. He genuinely believed that what he was doing was reasonable. That family loyalty meant I owed him my work, my code, my future, simply because we shared a last name and a dining room table growing up. That belief was the real problem. Not the NDA, not the attorneys, not the investor pressure. The belief that my contribution only counted when it served someone else's story. What stopped him wasn't luck, it was documentation. It was the habit I had built over years of working in environments where no one was watching out for me. The time-stamped commits, the notarized timelines, the emails I saved not because I expected to need them, but because I had learned, slowly, that clarity is a form of self-respect. That is something I had to teach myself. No one handed it to me. Every instinct I had about protecting my work was one I developed after being dismissed, talked over, or handed a folder and told to sign without reading. The intelligence I'm talking about isn't raw ability. It's the kind that grows from paying attention to what's actually happening rather than what you wish were true. I signed that NDA because I wanted to believe my brother was being straight with me. That was not stupidity. That was hope. But hope without verification is just exposure, and I learned the difference the hard way. The part that stays with me, though, is not the legal outcome. It's the keynote. Standing in a Memphis ballroom in front of 260 people I had never met, saying out loud that I had been told I didn't fit the image, and feeling, for the first time, that the room was actually listening. Not because I had won something, because I had kept going when every reasonable signal said the people closest to me did not believe I would. That persistence is not a personality trait you either have or don't. It is a decision you make, again and again, in the small hours when no one is watching. It is what I was doing every night. I opened my laptop after a full workday and kept building a system that my own family would later try to claim as theirs. My father apologized. I believe he meant it. But an apology does not rewrite what happened, and I have stopped needing it to. What I carry forward is not bitterness. I genuinely don't have the bandwidth for it anymore, but a very clear understanding of what it costs to shrink yourself for people who will not protect you in return. The cost is your work, your name, your place at the table. I chose the table I built instead. It turned out to have better food,